Yeah, so basically just to give you the rundown on like who we are the University of Dayton Game Development Club, and then also I've invited a couple other University of Dayton like faculty and staff members. But basically, I'm the president. I founded this club with Justin and Tyler, like last fall, like mid last fall semester. Basically just to get students more involved with creating games and everything that goes along with that, like music and programming and writing and 3D modeling, stuff like that. So we've had a decent start. We participated in a game jam together. We put out a game in about a month. It was a lot of fun. And then this last semester, we've been working on creating an arcade cabinet and then a fighting game for the arcade cabinet. And we want to put it in Kennedy Union to kind of like rep the club and show off a little bit. But yeah, do you mind just like giving like a brief introduction of yourself and like a little bit of a background?
Absolutely, yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Nick Lamb. Obviously, went to UD a long time ago, but not long, not three longs, just two longs ago. Okay, 20 years since I've been there as a student. Um, my background before that, I mean, obviously, I was a teenager. I got into gaming. I got into game hacking, and cheating and so on and so forth, and that led me into cybersecurity because that was the closest thing at the time that aligned with that interest and passion. And then the closest discipline at that time was network security. Application security or stuff like that wasn't as prevalent of a thing back then. So it was firewalls, early intrusion detections, isolation, stuff like that. So that's the early career history of mine. Led me into computer science as the main discipline, which I got my undergrad in computer science. After that, I went on to get my master's in a kind of a hybrid between computer security or computer science and electrical computer engineering. I want to get a little more of that hardware taste, if you will, and really understand the systems as a whole. You can write software all day, but if the hardware doesn't do what you want, or if you don't know what the hardware is actually doing, then it doesn't matter what you wrote in your software, right? And so on. So to kind of round out my security knowledge, I dabbled in some of that ECE fun stuff. Went into the government sector, became a civil servant for a while, 7 or 8 years, something like that. Then became a defense contractor for a bit. Then went to automotive because a few of my former defense contractor friends were like, automotive cybersecurity sucks. Like they have nothing here. You can hack pretty much anything out there. Can you come here and help us improve security and stuff like that? So I left the government realm of things for industry there and did that for about 2.5 years. Like this stuff is way too slow. I thought government was slow, but automotive is pretty much just as slow. It takes half a decade to get something out, right? So like I really want things faster turnaround than half a decade. And I happened just by dumb chance saw on through a LinkedIn thing was like, hey, Blizzard has a remote opportunity for game security. I'm like, what is this? Can this be true? I don't have to move to California to work for Blizzard. I'm going to go and hunt this down. And fast forward about 5 months, and I got the gig. I'm so excited. And yeah, now I'm leading the anti-cheat team at Blizzard Entertainment.
That's
That's
awesome.
my history there.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. So just for everybody's awareness, I have a couple questions that I can go through and kind of moderate the discussion, but anybody is free to ask a question at any point. You can like raise your hand in the meeting, or there's also a Q&A button in the bottom. Um, but Nick, I saw looking at your LinkedIn that you first got interested in security through gaming, potentially through Diablo and Battle.net. Would you be able to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Before I get into that specifics, I just want to do like the formalities, right? I'll say that my views are my own. I'm not speaking on behalf of Blizzard or Microsoft or anyone besides myself. So if I say it was easy to hack this thing or whatever, that's me saying it on my behalf. I'm not putting anyone down or putting anything else anyone else's mouth. I'm also not obligating Blizzard or Microsoft to give out jobs or something like that at this point, right? So this two formalities aside. Yes, interestingly enough, at least interesting for me, back when I got my first modern-ish computer, by modern I mean it can go on the internet, happened to be literally picked up the day before Diablo 1 was supposed to be available in stores. There was this guy at the store next to the computer shop that I got the computer from, or my family got the computer from, and was like, well, I need a game for this thing, and I'm just gonna like play some DOS games on this anymore. So walk next door and they were setting up the display for Diablo 1 and starting to put some of like it was late at night. It was probably like half an hour before they were closing, something like that. So they were stocking for the next day. And they were starting to put them out there. And I was like looking at it, I was like, seems pretty awesome. Rated M for mature. And I'm like 15 or 16 or something at the time. Like, if I can sneak this one in, I'm going to take it. Went down the path. Luckily, they're like, you're not really supposed to have this, but what do I care? I'm just a clerk here. So I'll sell you the game, whatever. It's like one day before it goes live or whatever. So then they got it one day before anyone's supposed to really get it for reals, which is kind of fun. And that's something on the whole path of internet gaming and like people can do like, what does cheats like how does it even happen? Like these games aren't supposed to let someone just like blast you in town or you can't hit them no matter what you do. They take zero damage, right? And so I started investigating that further and was like, oh, well, you can just change the software to do whatever you want. Well, client side software, do whatever you want to do. Doesn't seem great, but it seems fun. So I went down the whole like, getting in with the hackers and the cheaters like that. They were building the trainers and different things for Diablo 1 and then StarCraft, and eventually the Warcraft series, stuff like that. So build up sort of like that sort of interest in like, I want to know why software doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And I want to know how you can actually protect it to make it more resilient from that abuse, right? And that sent me down like the whole career, like kind of outlined towards the beginning of the call.
Yeah. And like at the time, what was the state of security? I mean, you said it was mostly client side validation. Was there any server side validation or were matches mostly like peer to peer?
Great question. So I'll speak mostly on behalf of Blizzard, like titles that I played. I did do some Red Alert and some other things like that as well. Going way back in the day. I'd say a lot more of it was peer to peer. And a lot of the state was distributed, right? The servers weren't meant to be able to handle tens of thousands of gamers coming on. Like they're still not really all like great at handling that now with like millions if you scale it up to like, a couple of decades later, right? But a lot of trust is put on the client side, right? And that trust, by the handful that decide to do it, right, can be abused. And Diablo was highly susceptible to that, right? Your entire character state is maintained client side. So you can patch it at will, a type of deal. StarCraft improved things a little bit because you have that real-time state that's going back to the server, right? So the server's kind of at least checking on things a little bit. But even that wasn't really doing a whole lot to prevent like fog of war hacks and so on and stuff like that. And then what you'll see is with different genres, you have different threats, right? First-person shooters, you care about map hack, ESP, stuff like that, right? Being able to see through walls, and then aimbots and stuff like that. Wall hack and aimbots don't really quite make the same sense in things like a real-time strategy where you're like top down of a map. You want to unveil the map and look at what's going on behind the map, basically see the whole picture, and that's how you kind of cheat. All these though, they have a common adversary, and that's the bots, right? Pretty much anything that can be done by a person, you can build a bot for, right? So they all have a certain sense of a bot, a botability, if you will, behind them, which could at least a little common threat between them, but the bots behave differently. They do different things. They hook different things, right? They're trying to achieve different things. So even though it's like, oh, just knock out the bots, it's not as simple as like, oh yeah, here's the little bot button. You check the bot button and you got rid of the bots.
Yeah. Kevin, you raised
I'm
your
sorry,
hand.
sorry. And I forgot to fully say that. A lot more of the state is moving to server side now, right? At least where it's possible. A lot of mobile games are sort of battling with the early PC gaming, how to do that transition. So you might see a little bit more trust on the mobile side than you do on the PC side nowadays. But
Yeah.
eventually, most state is going to be that needs to be authoritative. Hopefully, we'll end up on server side because that's how you ensure the integrity of the matches. Does not eliminate cheating. You can put all the server side, and you will not have a game because then there's nothing on the client to do anything, right? So you have to at least transfer some state down to the clients, and that's where the abuses will come in.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hey Nick, I'm an electronics hardware engineer, and I also fled from automotive. Maybe you wouldn't put it that way, but I would. Um, it seems like you kind of grew into this like land of opportunity in terms of software vulnerabilities, and got to like watch the state of the art develop from almost nothing. It's kind of curious. as you branched out into computer architecture and hardware stuff, as you mentioned, was there anything that really stood out to you as a hardware side vulnerability that hadn't been addressed yet?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks for that one, Kevin. Yes, there's a few things. So side channels are generally always going to be a thing, right? I mean, you can build hardening to really reduce the impact of those, but with the will, there's a way, right? Someone who's determined is going to be able to find some kind of effect that your system does that, it might take them like an hour of collection, it might take them a week of collection, but they can eventually get that crypto key or something, right? There's ways to do it. And so, I mean, and are there ways to solve it? Absolutely. Here's my views are my own. I think all this stuff in security domain can be solved. Whether people are willing to pay the price to do it is really the key to it, right? You can design like triple redundant security checks in hardware. You can design the software that makes use of those. If no one will pay, $5,000 for that processor to be able to enable it, and the $3,000 for the motherboard to enable it, and all that kind of stuff, right? You're never going to get that system out there. So it'll come down to a cost security trade-off. One of the things I've noticed, especially going into the 2020s, is I was hopeful that there would be more of a shift towards, this security stuff matters. Let's kind of fix things. It's unacceptable to have, all the seniors getting their bank accounts ripped off, right? There's like this attacks all over the place and different kind of things. And there are solutions to those kind of challenges that you can implement. But the appetite is just write it off as a loss and move on to the next thing. And until that concept, like across, banking and finance and other industries, switches to where like, what, this costs us too much money. Let's just invest in the security to fix it and then reduce our losses by 80% or something like that. And then people get like a win for it too. Like we don't get harassed. We don't have like having to go through like the 5-week process to prove we didn't make the purchase to send, stuff to South America that we've never been to and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the things I was hoping by now we would have more of a momentum behind, but there's always, this means it's going to happen in the future. It's a matter of when. So yeah, I think that hardware. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask you, like, in your opinion, do you think that one of these mechanisms that should be explored is like kernel level anti-cheat?
So there are a variety of kernel level anti-cheats out there, right? There are some by like just generic third parties that anyone can, in theory, go and buy and apply to the game, right? And some of them are built in-house by the game studios themselves. I won't name names just to protect the innocent or presumed innocent. But there's a certain amount of trade-off that you get with that, right? I mean, I guess you can take a raise of hands here. If Blizzard wrote a kernel anti-cheat, who's going to want to put that on their computer, right? Like, who wants to have a kernel driver running around? Blizzard does whatever the heck they want with it, right? I mean, I guess on one hand, if you trust us, you're going to do it, right? If you don't trust us, or if you're cheating, you're not going to do it, right? So there's that part of it, right? If you're cheating, you don't want to put it on there because when you get caught, that's not good news for you. So I think there's like some of the studios have decided like it's, we want to focus on maybe less customers, but higher theoretical integrity within the game, right? Being able to monitor and keep things, how they want them, at least within a threshold. Blizzard historically has never had a kernel presence, right? And we've had solutions out for, decades plus, right? So it seems to be working well, and our customers don't have, other than the ones that are trying to cheat that don't get to cheat, right? Because it blocks them, right? Other than those, we don't really have customer complaints about that darn, anti-cheats really slowing down the game for me or whatever.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about like after you got Diablo, that's what got you interested into networking, and then that was like kind of in your late teens. I'm assuming after that, that's when you decided I want to do computer science as a undergrad. What was your experience like at the University of Dayton, doing computer science?
Yes. So yeah, you're correct. That's the path that I went down. I actually went to Sinclair Community College for a couple of years to get some of the, not exactly easier, but trade the cost for the time, right? And then transferred in as like I guess technically like a sophomore plus plus. I don't know. It was technically I had like mid junior credits, but because of the distribution of the transfer, it was really like mostly most of the way through a sophomore. And I was also working, 39 hours a week. So it was almost full-time student, but I couldn't really manage that, right? So I was like, sometimes full-time, sometimes part-time in that regard. So it took me about 3 years at UD to finish up. But I never had the on-campus living experience. So that's one of the things, I don't know if you call it a regret necessarily, but I didn't really have that whole the full college experience. I was at home for the years, and I transferred in as a end of year sophomore, end of season sophomore, right? Sophomore. So they didn't really give me housing, and I had housing. So why would I then go into housing? So missed that experience. But the campus was great. I liked it. I still like it, even though I haven't visited very recently. Overall, I think that back when I went, the computer science area wasn't necessarily like very robust, right? It wasn't like its own like main area type of thing, right? And I think if I recall correctly, some of the classes are kind of scattered around campus a bit. I don't know if it's unified in the last 20 years to be more, consolidated. But yeah, I thought it was great. It was a great experience. Like I said, it let me, I graduated, with a high enough GPA and enough knowledge and experience to be able to go on and get a master's. So, I mean, it served me well. And it's served me well since.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the year right before we started, so we're going into our senior year, a lot of us. So like 4 years ago, they just finished building a computer science building, Hathcock Hall. So everything is kind of centralized now. You still spread out a little bit for like calculus and stuff like that, but
Mhm.
um yeah, so I mean, what was your postgraduate experience doing your master's like?
That one was fantastic as well. Because I sort of knew I wanted to go into the government sector of things, because that's where you can hack legally and not have anyone come after you, right? At least in theory, no one comes after you. So I got this scholarship. It's called Scholarship for Service, and basically you get a free ride, master's, and then you get a living stipend for a couple years, and you owe the government back basically a year for a year type of thing. So about 2 years for 2 years. So I got basically a full ride to Carnegie Mellon for my master's, and who's going to turn that down, especially when you get a guaranteed job at the end of it as well, right? Or at least unless you get arrested hacking before you graduate, right? Then you kind of busted, right? But fortunately that was not the path I went down. I kind of played it cool through grad school. I wanted to get through that and then land a sweet gig, and then hack professionally, so to speak.
Yeah. So we kind of already talked a little bit about how you jumped between like cybersecurity, government, automotive into eventually game security engineering. But would you be able to like tie together like what are the common patterns and things that you worked on that you think are relevant between each role change, particularly into game security?
Sure, that's an interesting question. So I guess the common theme is there's always another bug, right? There's always another security issue out there. Uh, I think, not to toot my own horn, but I think there's only been one target, if you will, that I've never been able to get into. Um, the other undisclosed number I've been able to get into, um, and that even the one I didn't get into is mainly because of a timing thing. There's like it has to be done within this period of time. We only have an opportunity for this amount, like this window. If we don't get done before then it doesn't matter if you get it done 2 weeks later, type of thing. Um, so yeah, I don't really feel bad not getting some, but yeah, essentially that's the model that I follow. It doesn't matter where you go. If you look around the corner, there's going to be a security, design issue there, a security flaw there, a software flaw there. You can look at critical infrastructure, right? That's another one of those kind of broad sectors, if you will, that is currently really interested in how to improve the security, their cybersecurity, right? You can look at pharmaceuticals, right? Think about it, like what's protecting pharmaceutical companies? Well, the same stuff, firewalls and access controls and stuff like that. Who's setting it up? I don't know. And what all the pieces are in there. Like actually, that's a good segue for my next thought was what's in those systems, right? Your hardware bill of materials and your software bill of materials, right? Especially over the last, I will say, 3 to 4 years with AI coming of age, if you will, and being able to read source code and generate new source code, and that starts being copied and pasted into wherever the person put the prompt in, and not checking it for validity, not checking it for backdoors, but also not checking any of that stuff for, at least for the most part, checking it for IP theft, right? Because, you know, if an AI snarfs up some, you know, licensed software, even if it found the source code somewhere and it is like, oh, this solves your exact problem. Look at that. I have a magic function for you or whatever. Now your organization copied in code that is technically not freely available. And now you have to put the at least nothing else, put like the license at the top, like this came from, you know, yada yada yada, which you're not going to have because that's not source code. It gets dropped by the AI, right? So you don't even know where it came from to know that you're stealing it, borrowing it from your AI friend, and such, right? So that's one of the hardware bill of materials, knowing where your hardware is actually designed versus where it's manufactured, versus where it's assembled, right? Is a challenge in the security domain. That's always been a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge in the future. That also your software is becoming increasingly more of a challenge like that. Like Microsoft, you know, build their code in their facilities, whatever, and you know, Microsoft is probably using Copilot now, right? And you know, where's the Copilot getting all that stuff? If it's only training off Microsoft code, that's interesting. I don't know if that's the case, right? And so being able to be, you know, thoughtful for how you use the results coming out of AI tools and stuff like that is going to be it's already an emerging, but it is going to be even a more complex challenge in the security domain into the future. And then where that kind of ties, you know, full circle back into gaming, game security is cheaters are starting to leverage AI because now it's fairly accessible, right? So they're going to start, you know, using these to build new kinds of cheats. And those cheats are presumably going to become more intelligent or at least more efficient and effective over time. And that means that, you know, we as game security engineers and writing the protections for our games had to be aware of that, and then, you know, be forward thinking and anticipatory versus reactive to that kind of.
Yeah, before I pass it off to Kevin, who raised his hand, I thought it might be interesting to mention, like I work part-time in security as well, and a lot of the AI stuff is interesting and changing the way that the field is. But something I saw pretty recently was a an attack called dependency confusion, where basically people would type into large language models like ChatGPT and say like, how do I do this in Python? And ChatGPT would hallucinate a pip library that doesn't exist, and then
Mhm.
someone would look for these hallucinations, go register the name on the Python package index, and then upload a malicious package that appears to do what ChatGPT thinks it does. And then people would download that and then basically be exploited. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
things where AI is completely changing it.
That's an interesting observation. I have not seen that for specific security, you know, attack vector, but it definitely makes sense. Same thing with like, you know, quickly before I hand over to Kevin, is like that's with like by movies and stuff like that. TV shows tend to register the domains they make up in the show before they announce it, so that people can't go and like snarf it up and
Yeah.
then use it for whatever purposes, you know, down the line.
Kevin, you had a question?
Yeah, so that last question made me wonder. Last question being, what are some, skills and wisdom that tie together your different roles in the past professionally? What are some things that maybe you didn't know much about, or you learned the most of after you entered game security?
That's a great question. I will say that generally hacking and stuff like that is, you know, fairly well understood by me. I did it for the government for 15 plus years, right? So I have a pretty good understanding of what nation states can do. In fact, work for one of the largest nation states, right? So definitely know the general trade craft that's out there. And I thought that was going to be like a very good port into game security because they're doing similar things. They don't have to do the whole vulnerability necessarily part of it, where they have to like find a way to get into the system. But once they get in there, they have to find a way to do what they want to do. And that's where like where, you know, whether you're doing like a government capability or you're doing like a game hack, you have to be able to know how to move around in the system and do things, surgically. Otherwise, you cause blue screen and stuff like that, and no one's going to use your cheat, right? If it keeps crashing. So, I think that's one of the biggest things is how different the mindset is for the cheat developers, it really is an economy. And if you go out there and you look around, you do some research on specifically like why do cheats exist in like large scale, you'll see some staggering numbers on how much you can make off of making cheats, right? You're like, oh, well, if you're making that much money, well, yeah, I can see why cheats exist out there. Now you're not going to get it for like Nick Lamb's Pong game or something like that, right? You're not gonna make any money off that, right? But like for big titles, like the major ones out there, AAA titles, especially if there's competitive gameplay involved in that, right? When there's competitive nature and you can make money off of it as a player, there's going to be a cheat provider that wants to make a cheat for it to be able to give you that leg up and get $100 a month or whatever it is from you to on the side, right? You times that by 1,000 people, you're making some pretty good money there to ride this service at the detriment of basically everyone else, or detriment of everyone else on the legit players, 99% or whatever the percent of legit players are out there.
So, in your current role as a game security engineer, what does that look like on the day to day? What are your priorities? What are you focused on?
Yeah, so actually I'm the manager of the team, so I don't do as much of the hands-on anymore, although I do dabble at night in exploratory things that I want to kind of either prove out a little bit before I ask the team to investigate it further, and stuff like that. So I can come up with like lots of crazy things, but if it's not practical or it's not it takes 3 years to implement or something like that, it's probably not worth and taking the team's time to investigate. But what we do is we have a bit of research what the cheats are out there, right? We have to look at what cheats exist for our games, and then go and figure out how they're functioning essentially, right? Basically getting around our defenses because they have to get around. You can't just click a cheat button and the game just starts cheating, right? You have to get around something to enable that particular functionality to work. So figuring out what those paths are and designing the solutions to be more resilient along those paths is kind of what the name of the game is, right? We have the deterrent, like anti-reverse engineering, and stuff like that. And then we have like the detection, which is like catch the ones that get past the anti-reverse engineering and actually build a cheat. So those two halves kind of make a complete picture for how you implement the anti-cheat, at least from the client perspective and monitoring the clients. But Daniel, I think.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a computer science student. I'm Dan at UD. I just want to ask a question. So earlier you mentioned there are some time aspects in your job, and like you started out in the government and it was a little slow, it turned out. And I've heard that in game development it can be quite fast paced with lots of deadlines and things like that. And you just had talked about your day-to-day job. How difficult or how stressful can your job be as a cybersecurity, trying to protect all the games that you manage specifically and your day-to-day?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so I would say that if I didn't love cybersecurity and the challenge of basically going after and slowing down hackers as much as I do, I could see it being called stressful. But for me, it's a passion. I like being able to go like, okay, I see you hacked it this way. That's very interesting. I didn't think of that approach. Kind of learn from what they're doing. Now I have that in my mind as a path that could be abused in the future, right? And building up that knowledge, because this is the thing I didn't really talk about earlier, and this is why I was so successful, because you're always gonna find a way to get into something if you spend enough time on it, right? And that's about, I'd say maybe around 2010, 2011, is when I sort of hit that, what's hacking the next thing really going to do for my soul, right? Like it used to be like exciting. I was like, oh man, I can't wait to get into this thing. This network device, this whatever over here, pick an operating system, get in that operating system. Every time like get in again, get in again, get in again, right? It became like, I was like, what's harder is stopping people getting in. It's stopping the hackers getting in. That's a hard problem. That's the one that takes like a lot of thought and specific focus to really think of the angles that they're going to abuse. Again, that's why I went back to like side channel effects and stuff like that. It's one of the really hard ones because software, it's hard to write anti-stop signatures for making so you don't leak things that can be collected through side channel means, right? But yeah, I think that's one of the exciting areas, and so not stressful. Maybe I shouldn't say that, my boss is watching right now, but yeah, it's really a joy. And I wasn't looking for going into gaming. I was content with automotive. It just wasn't as fast paced and turn around. Like I see making a change of this regulation is going to take 5 years before it gets adopted by any government, and then they have like a grace period of a few years to put it into a car. I'm like, I don't want to wait like a half a decade to a decade for any of the things I'm doing to make any kind of meaningful effect, right? I want something that's faster than that. And like I said, the Solid Blizzard, literally Blizzard is my go-to gaming company from the beginning, still lifelong focus on them. They just had an opportunity. It's like, I'm gonna find a way to get in there. I don't care what it takes. I'm gonna make it happen. And that's really what led me down this. And so I've had nothing but great times. Yes, there's points of stress and stuff like that where certain things are to do. And I will say a little bit of generic information. My team builds the security across all the different games, right? And if you look at some of the other studios that have, I'm not gonna name names, but they have like sort of like their focus game, the game that they're really known for, and that fits into a particular genre, right? Blizzard has like almost all the genres, right? They made some of the genres what they are, right? MMORPG, ARPGA, real-time strategies. Like these things were moved because Blizzard of the past, our legacy, made them such successful, exciting, environments for our players, and it caused others to branch out and make other games in those things, right? So we had to be, our security solutions had to be focused on kind of like breadth and depth. We can't just go like, I know that they're looking for ESP, and I'm going to tune a whole bunch of stuff to be very focused on how to slow down ESP. I want to figure out how to make things that are very focused on aimbots. Because again, first person shooter, right? We have to be more distributed in our approach and more thoughtful for how we integrate. And also we're not, we're like user space, right? So we have like our arsenal is not, we don't have the nukes that you have with kernel and stuff like that, or with DMA hacks and stuff like that, right? We're kind of defending the ground from the position that we've had for the last 20 some years. But that just makes the battle and the work all that more exciting, right? Yes, like you said, you could call it stressful, but I guess it would only be stressful if I didn't see any kind of future where there's like success, right? There's like, oh man, I'm sitting at a wall and I can't do anything past that wall. Like that's the end of it. I'd probably feel stressed, right? I don't feel that way at all, though. There's the future is great, and yeah, so I think it's low stress.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear, man. And especially, how was your experience transitioning from different industries? Because going from automotive and the defense and then into game, how different were they really? I don't know. Because
Yeah,
especially on
I'd
like the
say,
first day, I don't know.
yeah. So I'd say that the biggest transition was from general government to industry. And the reason why that was the case is with defense contractor or a government employee, you sort of have more or less, well, maybe not so much now, but guaranteed job security. That there's always gonna be like work for you to do, right? As long as you're good at your job, right, doing your stuff, you have like a sort of an endless career, right? There's less focus on profits and losses in that kind of realm, right? I mean, there is with the defense contractors or businesses, right? But with the government, there's not really profits and losses. So that kind of transition from that into industry where it's like we need to find like the cheapest way to put a security into a car. What does put a security in a car even? That's not how it works. The security in a car. Fix the security bugs. Okay. Well, you have like 100 plus ECUs in a car. Each one of those things talks to something. Most of them talk to something else. Otherwise, what's it doing in the car, right? Either something tells it to turn on, or it relays some kind of signal to something else that does some other additional processing, right? So solving security for cars is a big challenge because of that, right? Now you do have some consolidation going on where they're trying to reduce the number of hardware components to just make them bigger and more powerful, but fewer of them. kind of like that design. It helps with the supply chain resiliency to a certain extent, right? You have to have, instead of stockpiling 1,000 parts times, 10,000 or 1,000 pieces of 10,000 for parts for 10 years of vehicles, because you need to have the support for all those. Now you just have a lot less warehousing you have to do and stuff like that. And a lot less supply volatility with that. But we're not there yet, or they're not there yet. And that industry is a lot more profit driven, right? Really, I thought they were joking. I've heard this up before. Automotive is like, they won't spend 10 cents on a part unless they're going to lose like 1 million, sales on it. Then they're going to spend that 10 cents. It's pretty. They count the pennies in automotive. I'm not joking. They count the pennies. There's some solutions I was looking at, and it was going to cost like 4 cents a unit. Like, no, get that down to about 2, maybe a little less than 2, and then we might be able to get that. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, can we just secure the thing and then pass on 2 pennies to the customer? I mean, tell them their cars are going to get hacked as they're driving down the highway. They might pay 2 cents for that. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works, because I wasn't working for an OEM, so I couldn't actually make an OEM make a change like that, right? We're the suppliers for the customer in that role. So trying to tell them like, it's only 2 more cents for you guys to be able to put like a sticker like cyber secure on the side of it or something like that. Didn't happen. So that was like a big jump, moving from the general government to automotive, where it was really counting pennies to make effects, cybersecurity effects be practical. That was the biggest jump. I would say that the second biggest one was government into defense contracting. Again, probably because it went from, there's not really profit driven. So do great things, achieve great results, support the country, right? And do your part. Now you have to do that, but then you also have to be aware of how much time you're spending on things, how many people are on your team. Delivery schedules become like more important, because now the customer is the government and they want something delivered on time. So, right. So when you're a government person, you kind of get a little bit more flexibility on the delivery in many cases, not in all cases, right, but in many cases. So yeah, that was probably the next biggest jump. And then actually jumping into game security was probably the easiest jump. But again, because of my history and being kind of passionate about gaming and getting my start in gaming, it sort of doesn't matter. I would have done whatever I had to, like I said, to get in here and make this work, right? So that one is like probably the least of the complexities in switching career wise.
Well, that's really cool. I'm in the defense scene right now. I have a similar experience to you. It's like, things take a long time, and I'm just getting my feet wet right now as a intern. But thank you for sharing your experience. That was really cool. And yeah, thank you.
Got a couple queued up here. I think Grant, you are next, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So my question back to Blizzard. So you said how Blizzard, they've created these games and they've kind of evolved with games. They went from a lot more box games to now I feel like almost every one of their games is a live service game. So do you know how anti-cheat changes from like the box games versus the live service games?
Yes. Everything evolves. Kind of run there. There you are. Everything evolves over time, right? And live services, by their very nature, right, require sort of at least a slightly, if not a drastic, change in approach. So if you want to think about things, if you go back 20 years, and like I said, maybe 15 years, to be going to be honest, close to about 15 years, when anti-cheats were really starting to mature, right? There's some out there in the mid 2000s, some in the early 2000s, right? But they really started growing in robustness as the number of gamers coming online started going up and up and up, right? So that sort of the supply and demand model sort of drove up the need for those and the services, anti-cheat services, and you'll see some games that again, I'm not going to drop names specific, but they haven't taken anti-cheat very seriously. They're still very popular back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you probably know what I'm talking about. And cheating is like, why don't you just fix this? You have a way to fix this, just fix it. And you're like, nah, it's an old game. Who cares? Like, the millions still playing it here. But and then you go forward to now, and you have like these again, competitive games, real time, live nature of things has changed. And then I think that, really anti-cheat, again, if you break it down into the two main categories of preventative stuff and then real time, live detection of cheaters and cheat behaviors, stuff like that. That's that real time is really what's changing, more significantly, right? Your detection aspects, and that impacts things differently. Because with either kind of any kind of a game, you go back as far as you want. The problem is the state of the basic game is on the client, right? And you can put as much anti-tamper, anti-reverse engineering protection to that you want. You give people enough time, they're going to find a way to attack it and find a loophole or a way to abuse it in some way. And then when that happens, you really just have your detection mechanism, or people reporting like this person's like in here like killing everybody in 1 second. And you get reports, and you can take actions on people because they get reported a lot. Rage hacking, right? But if you're a subtle cheater who's not just trying to ruin the experience for everyone, your detection mechanisms are really what help you out there, and that's evolved over time because the cheats are getting more sophisticated over time as well, right? They're moving from, it used to be all user space because there was no need for any kind of kernel cheat, because you could do everything you wanted from user space. And then the cheats, anti-cheats go into the kernel, and like, wait, now we got to go in the kernel, right? To be able to level the playing field. At least some of them have gone in the kernel, right? To level the playing field in that regard. And yeah, did that fully answer your question, or am I?
Yeah, that answers it. I had a follow-up too, though.
Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned reports, and I know, like, as someone who played Overwatch and plays Overwatch some, you run into people that just like, oh, they're a bad teammate, reported, or something like that, and just like you get a bunch of false reports. How do you like filter through all those?
Great question. So depending on what you're reported for, it may come through my team or not, right? If you're like cussing people out and threatening to hunt people down in their homes and stuff like that, that goes to a different team. That's not anti-cheat. That's toxicity. It's being hostile to other players and stuff like that. So it kind of depends on what kind of reporting you're being associated with. AFK or just sitting there not doing anything or something like that, not really helping the team but not doing anything at all, isn't really anti-cheat. Like my team's anti-cheat either. I know you can like stack a game where you can put like a bunch of players in there to make sure that you're on the other, your real account's on the other side, and you have a bunch of duds on this side, right? There's bots screwing around or whatever. And yes, you can kind of power level yourself up to those means. And that sort of is the edge of where my team can kind of get involved. But sorting through the noise is a challenge. And we have some systems that help automate those. Like, I'm not gonna go into specifics. I can't give out our algorithms, right? But so I say we don't just like all like, oh, Nick Lamb reported 17 people. Nick Lamb's a bad person because he's reporting too many people, right? At the other side of that too, just because someone got 17 reports, I mean, I guess they're all like in the span of like 2 hours, maybe there's something to it, right? But it doesn't necessarily automatically lead to a result. And that's why we do have a team that goes through and reviews the reports and goes and investigates whether there's legitimacy behind it and stuff like that. But it is a data problem, right? Especially when you have millions of players, and if you just took a 1% off that being cheaters, and let's say 50% of those get reported for you get at least a report for cheating, right? You're looking at however many, you multiply it out, right? And then you have multiple games. Again, you have for us WoW, you have Overwatch, you have Diablo 4, we have other things, right? So you have like a large volume that you have to be able to process, and we have dedicated teams that work around the clock to keep those things going. Thanks.
It's awesome.
Cameron.
Go ahead, Cam.
Hi, so I actually had a follow-up question to Grant's, because now that you brought up the kind of reporting thing, it brought up something interesting to me. When you get a ton of reports, right? You say, okay, hey, we have a legitimate reason to look further into a player and say, hey, should we ban this player? Should we not? Or, what route should we take? Obviously, you can't go through a system of like looking through a full VOD, right? Because that's going to take way too much time to look through a full gameplay. So how do you kind of efficiently figure out how a report is legitimate or not? Like, what does that process look like after you know that you're kind of looking into someone?
Yeah, so appreciate that. So there, again, it kind of depends on what the reports are for, right? And you can get, and obviously if you're a cheater, you can also be like, being vulgar in game, right? So you could have reports for language and for cheating, like ESP or aimbotting or something like that, right? And I'm going to focus on Overwatch for now, but we can pick a different genre if you guys want to delve into it. But let's say you're playing Overwatch and you're getting reported, but you can only get really so many reports in one match, right? With one set of players. And depending on, let's just say that you are using ESP and you are using an aimbot, you can go into like a replay or whatever, right? And say, okay, like, is it possible, like for like snippets of time, that this is like reasonable gameplay, right? You don't have to watch a full 20 minutes of stuff to be like conclusive or fairly conclusive, like statistically this is not possible. Looking at how this is being played is not possible. Like, it's not human in nature, right? And again, there's a lot of assistance out there that you can use technology wise, and some of the other game studios are using these and stuff like that. But you can look at the heuristics, right, of player behavior, and going from point A to point B in a straight line like every time is not humanly possible. You can't do it with a mouse, right? It's not something you can do. And if you do that like 5 times in like 5 minutes, what more evidence do you need than that, really? And it's not possible. And it also takes 0.01 seconds to do it, and it's always spot on in the middle of the head. Like, it's like, again, there's eventually statistics is your friend, and he's like, it's not mathematically possible for a human to have done this over. You can get lucky once in a while, right? But like, it can't be 95% of the time you're hitting like perfect headshots. Your accuracy is 99.7%.
Right.
Like,
So
it's not possible.
is that something where maybe the reports will automatically flag like a minute or 10-second or whatever portion replay of it, so you don't have to go through and watch like the whole 40-minute game or whatever it might be?
So I have never actually, my team does not go into the games themselves. We build the technologies that enable the anti-cheat services, but we don't enforce the rules, right? We are not the ones that go and take the reports that come in and stuff like that and go and investigate them. We do provide some technical support of sorts to be able to like to help triage and like confirm things, but we're not the investigators, if you will. We're the engineering team that builds the solutions. So I won't really speak on their behalf too specifically, but there are, like I said, technologies that assist in really focusing our efforts, because like was discussed, you have like a team of whatever size, and you have reports that are a lot larger than that team size. You can't really go through multiple 20-minute, 30-minute sessions that really prove things out and stuff like that, right? Meaning watching the full videos and like, oh yeah, I know for sure. So we do have those technologies that help out.
Sweet, thank you. And then I wanted to actually wrap back to what I was going to ask originally, but Grant asked a really good question. So I wanted to talk about kernel level anti-cheat a little bit, and my favorite game that I play quite a bit uses kernel level anti-cheat, and there's been some downsides where I've had like blue screen and crashing, performance, drivers. I know I'm not the only player that's just kind of something that comes with kernel level anti-cheat, but I don't really know a lot about it. And um, with all the downsides, what are the pros to kernel level anti-cheat? You'd think, or at least I would think, hey, it's kernel level, we can automatically flag cheats, but it's still an arms race there, and still plenty of cheaters in my games. So what are the pros to it? And then why doesn't every company avoid using kernel level anti-cheat? If Blizzard can get away with not having it in their games and it works, and then also, is there a way that a game picks out, say, like, hey, we're going to use kernel level anti-cheat, or this game doesn't make sense to have it?
Excellent. So I want to try to answer all that, but there felt like there's about 3 in there. So if I forget a piece, just when I get done speaking, just refresh the piece that I missed on that. But essentially, kernel anti-cheat. What's it good for? If you know, if Blizzard doesn't need it, why does anyone else need it? I'll focus on those for now. So what kernel anti-cheat does is it tries to level the playing field a bit, right? So if you go back to the deterrent / protection, right? You know, anti-reverse engineering, basically obfuscating the code to make it hard to make a cheat to begin with, and then eventually they get around it. You have to assume eventually they get around that, and then you have to have a detection mechanism to find the ones that got around it, right? So mainly the protections for anti-cheat, kernel anti-cheat, are going to be relevant to the detection side. There's not much that I don't see a particular benefit to making an anti-cheat capability that is trying to provide anti-tamper, anti-reverse engineering things, right? Because they own the system. They can just have the whole thing shut down and they can get to the code. So that whole reverse engineering thing, like the kernel thing, isn't going to give me anything to stop reverse engineering, right? At all, essentially. So it's all going to be detection side. And what that does is, as the cheats move into the kernel, you at least have the same. You're fighting airplanes with airplanes, and you're fighting, tanks with tanks at that level, right? Now they're not the same aircraft, they're not the same tanks, but at least you're fighting like with the same kind of comparable military, forces. You, depending on what level in the kernel you go, right? There's boot time kernel drivers, right? And then there's like runtime or load when the game loads kind of kernel drivers. It gives you perhaps more or less, but more likely more if you're a boot time driver, protection capabilities, because you're starting up before Windows really loads. In theory, if you're monitoring everything going on after it, properly, you have a good understanding of what's going on in the system. So when a kernel cheat gets loaded up, you're like, yeah, it looks suspicious over there. I don't like how that looks. Do whatever you're going to do with it, right? If you're a runtime one, the cheats are just going to, in general, they're going to load before you run the game, and they're already in the kernel. When the kernel anti-cheat goes in there, it's now got to play catch up, right? It's got to like make sure it isn't getting tricked by the thing that's already there when it gets loaded in the kernel, right? To kind of nullify it or make it look the wrong space or not see something that's going on over here. And that point, it becomes sort of like very similar kind of game to malware that's hacking into a system, right? They're trying to get in the kernel and run around and hide in different places and stuff like that. You're kind of playing a similar game at that point, not identical, but similar kind of cat and mouse game there. So I think what you can safely say is that with a kernel level detection capability, you at least have 99.9% coverage over user space, right? And then you have X amount of coverage over kernel space. But what you don't get with that is any protection to get hypervisor cheats. And you don't get any protection against DMA or other hardware-based like manipulations or just doing raw hardware stuff, right? I mean, you might get a little bit, but it's not really, just because even if you're a boot time kernel driver, you're still essentially software running on a hardware platform. And if they have like a DMA hardware device, well, and they do it right, what are you going to do about it? Like, they can see the memory. You can't see they see the memory. What's your driver going to do? Well, it's boot time or run time. It's not going to necessarily give you the full picture of what's really going on in the system. Then you have to go and fall back to those heuristics, right? Is it reasonable for a player to be, in the top, 5 of the ranking system, pick whatever ranking system is, right? And getting 93%, accuracy and so on and so forth. There's eventually like numbers start to be the way to win the game there and for detection purposes. Now, I'm going to pause there. What part did I miss? Because I feel like I missed a part, but I wanted to make sure that
No, I mean, I really appreciate your answer.
Blizzard.
That the
Sorry.
only,
There's
yeah.
Blizzard part. It's like why are we so successful in user space?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that and just my thing is, I know 2, I won't say names, but 2 very similar games that are like the same competitive level of a very professional level scene, but one has a kernel level anti-cheat, one doesn't. So like, how does the game determine, what if it makes sense for their game or not to have a kernel level anti-cheat? That's the other question I had.
Yes. So I appreciate that. Yeah. So Blizzard, I mean, I would say part of it is because of our history, right? We have 30 years of making games, and we haven't gotten the kernel yet. So, why go down the path of exploring that? There are benefits, right? I mean, clearly I said like it would give our detection the ability to at least up its game to the level and give us a chance in that space, right? So it's not like it's not interesting or not that it's not possible, right? But we just had a long history of being successful with really focusing on protecting the game assets and state from user space, and we haven't hit thresholds where all the game teams are coming in like, cheating stinks, you guys are terrible, like, can't you do something about this? And then we had to really address it. So when you have like the game teams are satisfied with the numbers that they see, right, then there's not really a strong force telling you to move in that direction, right? Now when it comes to other studios, I can't speak for them either anymore than again, my views are my own, right? I'll throw that back out again. If you have, this is going to sound a little crass, a one-hit wonder that you're kind of known for, right? And that's your bread and butter. And you want to try to protect that particular title or that family of titles or whatever. You may invest in a kernel anti-cheat to try to optimize your player satisfaction, right? To keep a large user base, right? So you're going to lose some people that are like, I just refuse to install this, this stuff, right? Okay, that's going to happen. You're going, but you lose people anyway, right? Just over time, like some people just stop caring about a particular game, or they graduate college and they decide they're working full time, they don't have time for gaming or whatever. That's not you guys yet, right? But sometime down the road that might happen. And so there's more than just the kernel driver being present or not is the factor for adopting a game or not adopting a game. But for some, that's going to be an important consideration, right? There was brought up also stability and stuff like that, right? That's another reason why we've been happy with user space, because if you cause a blue screen from a user space anti-cheat, there's something wrong with the rest. Something else in the system is like wonky, right? You shouldn't be able to do that. The whole point of like process isolation being in user space is that you can't cause the underlying system to fault like that. So there's that aspect of things too. It really comes down to the game team at that studio. The studio has a certain mentality about what they want to accept in their game. And they may say, we want to keep cheating under making up a number, 0.5%. So, or they're under 0.25% or whatever their threshold is. And they go like, well, what's available for anti-cheat in user space? Not really much out there. Do I want to go with like a stock easy anti-cheat from a third party providing it? Sure, you can do that. I can build my own. Sure, I can do that. With building your own, you get the ability to control everything, right? You get the good and the bad, right? You have the responsibility when you blue screen that you screwed up, right? But then you have the full flexibility to tune it however you want to do, and for your particular engine, at your particular code level, you can go in there and look for those kind of places where the cheats are going to hook and watch those type of behaviors, and so you get a little bit more confidence in your ability to protect your game.
Great, thank you. That gives a lot of perspective on that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I appreciate all the questions from everyone in the club. I just want to make sure, Nick, I had a couple of follow-up questions just based on the conversation so far, but I want to make sure I'm being respectful of your time.
Oh, yeah.
Do
I'm
you
good to go.
have
I can continue on. I have time.
Okay. Maybe tentatively we'll just say like 5 p.m. I think we talked about being like a hard stop.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Well, yeah, kind of going back a little bit to one of Dan's questions was the timeline. I guess you were dissatisfied with automotive because the turnaround time for having an impact was so long. But I'm kind of wondering about in the games industry, like what is your turnaround time? How fast are new cheats coming out? How fast do you have to mitigate them? Like how fast are your changes being reflected in production?
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so this is going to be one of those varies by game studio, right? There are some game studios that have focus on like one or two things, right? There's There's unlike us to have like, and there's even larger ones like, there's Sony's out there, right? Like, Microsoft with the Xbox and all that kind of stuff, right? There's like those that have lots and lots of titles that they have to like monitor and stuff like that. But I'm kind of keeping everything sort of ignoring the console realm for now and keeping everything sort of PC on the PC side of things. When you sorry, I actually kind of forgot the question I was going down. What was it? What was it again? Can you prompt me again?
It was kind of like what's the turnaround time?
Oh,
Like,
that's
are
right.
you
Sorry. Yes.
satisfied in the games
Yes.
industry? Like your changes have a reflection in live service pretty quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So because we have so many titles, that means whenever we have a new code change, it can be reflected fairly quickly on the schedule. So not spreading any secrets here, but we don't launch updates for all of our games on the same day at the same time, right? We have like a schedule of those so that all of our services are smooth, right? So because of that, we get a natural timeline of like when we have like something done, it's going to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 1 week or whatever. We kind of know where it's going to fit into that release cycle. So we have the benefit of being able to know that it's not going to be like, when's the next expansion coming out? Okay, it's going to be like 6 months. Okay, well, that's when the next solution is going to go out. We have a lot more predictability behind it, and that feeds back into that faster pace thing, right? We can do things much more quickly, and that's for largely the anti-tamper, anti-reverse engineering things where we have to wait for a patch for the game to come out to reflect those changes, right? For the near real-time detection, right, or being able to observe and look for cheats, we can be a lot more responsive than that, right? We collect data, we analyze the data, we look for patterns of behavior, and we can tune those as quickly as we can tune them, right? And so that we can get results much more quickly from that. So in that regard, it's much faster even than known, like every week or every other week kind of release cycle for software changes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had kind of another question. It's partially borrowed from someone in the Overwatch streamers chat. So Justin and I, before we met with you, we reached out to a couple streamers and like their chats to collect questions. And one that came up was someone mentioned that the developers of Apex Legends discontinued Linux support because they said most of our cheaters are on Linux. And I know like particularly Overwatch does not have a native Linux build, but a lot of people run it like with bottles or like I've ran it in Proton before. Do you see like a majority of cheaters on Linux? Is this a problem for you?
Okay, so that's an interesting, and it's interesting for multiple reasons. That's an interesting question. So I kind of liken the Linux environment to the the high stakes, Las Vegas high rollers table type of thing, right? If you can design anti-cheat services that survive Linux, then you win the rest of them kind of for free, right? Because that kernel is like make your own Nick Lamb Linux, right? I mean, whatever. It's trivial to fork it and do whatever you want. You can lie about anything you want. You're not even lying. It's the honest thing because you wrote the kernel and your kernel says, I'm going to cheat in the game. That's a legit operation. Like, I mean, what more can you do to have that environment be your starting point? So if not saying there's any plans at all, again, I'm not going to obligate Blizzard or anything, but if we ever went to like supporting Linux, games natively, anti-cheat would have to be not solved necessarily, but has to be addressed for that, right? And anything you can do to address that is going to have derivative value for console solutions. It's going to have derivative value for mobile solutions, right? Because you're going to have to approach the challenge as like we're the ones that are blind and don't know what's going on anymore, right? We can't trust. We don't know anything about the state other than it's Linux. Maybe we don't know that. Maybe it says it's Windows, right? We just don't know. So you have to assume that everything that you know is only partially valid, right? And at the end of the day, what that means is you have to design more resilient, more thoughtful solutions. And those take time to do because they may be different than how conventional anti-cheat solutions are built now. But like I said, I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy the hackers are they're doing this, that, and the other. I'm not giving up the game. Blizzard's not giving up the game, right? So we're excited to at the future, whether it's Linux or not, or whether there's like a Linux feature or not, right? But I will say that I'm not specifically scared of the Linux, platform. I don't think that that's. I know why. I know some other details why that decision was made, but I can't really share and comment on specifically. But um, they're not the only ones that feel that way, right? There is it's hard. You make a kernel, say you make a kernel driver, and literally like the kernel rejects you, like it just go away. Like you could do whatever it wants, right? There's no assurance there. So you invest these resources in these techniques that have been more or less somewhat successful, at least on Windows platforms, right? And they just no longer apply. So you have to think about like I said, the challenge in a different way, and start looking at different concepts and where other things have been, other industries have solved similar kind of challenges, and then bring those kind of solutions into the anti-cheat space.
Yeah. As far as like, I guess as it stands today, I'm thinking mostly of Overwatch. No official Linux support, but a lot of people run it through compatibility layers like Proton and Wine. Um, do you like notice like a lot of people cheating like using these compatibility layers, or is that kind of like a almost like a black box for you? Do you guys not even know like, oh, this person who received this report was running through Proton on Linux?
Yeah, so I can't get into that specific trade craft that we use, but we we know how our game is supposed to execute. We know how it's supposed to behave, and we do monitor to make sure it's behaving how it's supposed to behave. And when you're in an environment that is significantly different than what you're programmed against, you inevitably leave artifacts and signatures or timings are like off, or just stuff is just different, right? Um, and those can all be used to, if you piece enough of the pieces together, you're like, oh, it's some Linux. Or they could even have like executables running, right, that you can just see the processes, right? And like, oh well, I mean, right there it is. Like these things don't exist in Windows. There is Linux, right? So I mean, sometimes it's really easy, sometimes it's more challenging. Uh, but yeah, I Linux, and I like Linux, right? It's like I said, it's the hacker's playground for getting like doing whatever you want and stuff like that, right? So like I said, that's the challenge of the future. And I would even, again, my views are my own, but I think if we solve that as a organization, you open up gaming, not like 50% increase or something like that, right? But you might get like 3% or 5%, and if you already have big numbers, then you'll get that can add up, right? And then over time, who knows what happens with Windows, right? But you have some diversity there, right? Um, and at the end of the day, most people playing most games are legit, right? Otherwise, who's gonna play where like 80% of the people are cheating? Like it's not even fun to be a cheater if everyone's cheating, right? Most games are have most people that want to be nice, enjoy the experience. And fortunately, Blizzard, it's a lot better than 55% of people are legit, right? And that's why we get a lot of return customers. That's why we get a lot of people playing across multiple titles within our portfolio, right? Because we bring that entertainment experience there, and we try to make the best thing that we can for as many people as we can, and that resonates, right? In such. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like in my experience playing Overwatch, I don't think I've ever encountered a cheater a single time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where's the
So I'd say
reaction?
you're doing a good job.
Where's it?
Um,
Yeah. Clapping. Yeah.
but yes, so like what when I was asking these questions to streamers and like their chats, one of the most common like collective questions was like, what role does automation play in the process? Can someone be automatically banned like all the way through from a report to an action is made without human intervention? Or is it kind of a system where someone gets reported for playing weird and then you start to use tools like, well, what did their input look like during the match? Are they jumping around? And then it's like a manual process.
So unfortunately, I can't really go in again into our specific, techniques and our specific strategy for how we address those. So I can't answer that really directly, or at least I won't answer that really directly. But I know that there's a lot of perception out there that that's, there's like, oh, you can just get someone reported you once and now your account's banned and you lost $300 because all your games are, bound to got banned or whatever. We do have an appeals process, right? So if you are hit with something, right, you can go through the appeals process and say, I wasn't cheating. Here's a scenario what happened, or whatever the case is, right? Whatever your particular situation was. I'll say that for the most part, obviously, when people are actioned, there's enough reason to say that it was justified, and that the appeal rate is not very high. The overturn rate, let's put it that way, is relatively speaking not very high. If we had more returns than successes, we would just not use our system because it's wrong more than it's right, and then that's not helpful, right? So, in general, like I said, we have various teams. They have very focused functionality, and they are all really good at their job. And yes, automation helps because of the volume, but automation is not the end all be all for anything anti-cheat or any kind of thing like that, right? We have not turned over the keys to anti-cheat to an AI to make decisions for us and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you touched on basically where I think that comes from is people are like, I got banned and somebody probably didn't even look at it and I lost all my skins and stuff like that. But yeah, I think you raise a good point that like if there was a million false positives, you probably wouldn't be using it. So, but another kind of interesting question from an Overwatch player was like, do you see a lot of new cheat creators, or are you kind of almost fighting a perpetual war against like the same creators of like ESPs or
Yeah, I
bots?
think that question came up earlier and I forgot to really touch on it. So I'm glad you brought that back. On the one hand, there are more resources now than ever, which is always going to be the case because data just keeps collecting, right? To enable people getting started in cheating, right? If you go back 20 some years, what do we have on documentation on how to write a cheat for a Blizzard game? Like there's not that much, just some forum somewhere, maybe like someone posted something at one point. Good luck finding that one thing, that one needle in the haystack. Now there's dedicated communities behind cheating, and it's not just cheating on Blizzard games, it's like just cheating in general, right? Like how do you go after an Unreal Engine based game? How do you go after a Unity based game, right? Some of them specialize in those kind of focus areas. Some of them focus on the studios. Like I just love hacking Blizzard games, so I'm gonna do I'm gonna go across the board and hack as many of them as I can, right? Kind of really depends on the group's interest and stuff like that. Now, I would say definitely within the last 10 to 12 years, a lot of it has switched over, and there was some of this before, right? But a lot of it switched over to like monetary, like true monetary value. How do I how do I get basically dollar bills out of cheating? Yeah, right. And one of them is obviously through selling cheats, but then there's also botting in certain things, right? And so you go out there and you can buy an account that has already been max leveled or something like that, right? Well, now you don't have to spend any of your time to get there, and you just maybe that's worth it to you. There's certain high profile people that apparently brag about having like people play their accounts for them or parallel. I'm not going to name names or anything, but there's some people out there that have done that, right? And then those become tricky situations and how you handle those. Thankfully, that's above my pay grade to handle those kind of things. So I don't have any further comment on that, but it's an ebb and flow, right? When a new title comes out, again, if it's a new Blizzard title, I don't want to hypothesize a name. But it's to say a brand new Blizzard title, someone's gonna be like, "Oh wow, I really want to hack that title," right? And it becomes like a passion project for them. Maybe they want to be the first one to release a cheat for it. That's their motivation. Maybe it's like, I can make some money off this. I made money off the other three, earlier versions or whatever. I can make money off this fourth one. Boom, I'm going to go for it. Right. And it really kind of depends on the motivation, but where there's money, there's going to be interest. But it's not only the money, right? It's going to be sort of egos to a certain extent, right? Like I want to be the one to hack. I want to prove I can hack this, right? Some of it's like basically some of it's internally driven, some of it is monetary, externally driven, and stuff like that. So I would say that it is a continuous battle, right? And some cheats exit the market. They, anti-cheat gets too hard for them, and like they'll say whatever they're going to say, why they left. I hate Blizzard, whatever the reason for it is, they leave, right? And then, and sometimes someone new enters in, like, oh, I got a new way of doing it. I'm doing an AI laser thing on my monitor and like whatever, new technique, right? So they enter the space. So which is good and bad, right? On the one hand, it means we always have more work, and the techniques and the tradecraft of the cheaters advances. But that means we get, like I said, there's a challenge that we have to think about more and figure out ways to provide our protections and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So is there ever a winning? I don't think there's ever really a winning. And in fact, we kind of joke about it, or at least I joke about it internally. Like, we can win the cheat, war by getting rid of all our games and shut out all our services down and pack up, we're gone, and no more cheating. Whatever happens after that doesn't matter. We're gone. That's the only way you're going to win the game of cheating is go out of business, like leave entirely. And then you don't have to worry about cheating anymore.
Yeah. I have maybe something interesting to bring up, but I'm not totally sure how I want to phrase it yet. But maybe about like the virtue of getting into modding through creating cheats. I mean, it sounds like you yourself with Diablo, you got into reverse engineering and security through Diablo. I'm gonna put this image in the chat and also read it out loud, but there's an interesting screenshot that I think about sometimes from a forum about binary asset packing formats in like game engines. And I was like reading up on it, trying to like basically do research for my own game engine. And somebody had said something along the lines of, don't do this because anybody could read this and modify this data in your game. Like it's not encrypted. And someone said like, this is the worst take you could possibly have. This is like, they attach a screenshot. They say like, this is a screenshot from when I was working on FF7 when I was 17, assets I hacked out of the game. Today I work at Square Enix as a senior graphics programmer on Final Fantasy 15. Why is it that you think having resources hacked is a bad thing? Hacking Final Fantasy 7 and getting encouraging results made my career. So how do you, I guess you got your start in a similar way. So how do you look at maybe people who are getting into the scene through creating cheats? Do you think there's a level where it stops being virtuous?
That's interesting. That's an interesting question. It does come up a lot, right? There's a lot of forum posts all over the place about related topics to what we're discussing. And while I don't want to specifically endorse cheating, right, or going out there, it does give you, if you're successful at it, right, it does give you an understanding that is valuable to other organizations, right? And it does give you a certain skill set that is sort of specialized, right? And any kind of specialization like that can be used in other domains, right? You can transfer that. I mean, not maybe like one-to-one, but you have like that knowledge and that experience and that perspective of things. And within security as like a larger picture thing, that transfers, pretty well, right? And so even if you're taking some free open source cheat out there and you're just watching how it works and kind of taking it apart a bit and looking at it, if it's a source is there, right? And it's really, oh, that's how it works. That's what it's doing. Oh, it's doing this in the kernel or whatever it's doing, right? That all gives you more knowledge, and you as an individual having more knowledge is always it's a good thing, right? It gives you again that perspective and it allows you to, 20 years later, in my case, was it 2025, almost 30 years later, like, oh yeah, back in the day, Diablo 1, original classic BattleNet, which still is up and running, by the way, because I do go on Diablo 1 every once in a while still. I think my boss's boss jokes like, you're one of 12 people that still goes on there monthly. He knows which account it is because there's only 12 people to look at. So yeah, there's there's benefits to doing that. The other thing I'll say is if you don't do that, then how do you gain those skills and perspectives, right? Now, one thing that I'm doing in my own spare time is writing a really crappy game and writing cheats for that really crappy game. And I do that not because I need to be able to do that on my day job, right? My team does the main engineering work, but it's one thing like, oh yeah, it's ESP. Just seeing through the wall. Just draw a little box over here or outline a character over here. Yeah, easy peasy. One thing to say that, another thing to actually make it work, right? So in my little, crappy toy first-person shooter, I'm working on the ESP part of it right now, and I have it, mostly working. But it definitely, and again, it's a joke thing, right? It's not a real production or anything. But just that context gives me like a better appreciation for how these things have to work, because I'm doing everything in user space, but I can imagine going to kernel space and trying to make sure you have the right, handles to things to be able to either overlay directly within the game or going directly to the monitor, being able to account for that, and between going to the NVIDIA driver or whatever else is in the kernel, right? It gives me that much more of the perspective of what has to be done to be successful at that. And that's going to be the same general approach for most of the cheats that are doing like an ESP thing or whatever it is they're doing, right? Yeah, DMA is a little bit different because they're taking the data with hardware and processing it. But at the end of the day, it's a similar type of thing, right? They have to draw an outline of some sort somewhere on the screen to tell you that someone's behind an obstacle of some sort, right? And being able to do that, successfully requires a series of successes that you have to be able to enable as a cheat. And so, like I said, that's why I have a little toy project, working on that myself to really gain more of that appreciation for that complex thing. And then there's other things, right, too, that are also aimbot like that. That one's actually a little bit easier in my crappy thing than ESP, just because of the design of the little thing I'm working on. But yeah, I digress a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I guess I had never considered, like, you even mentioned all the way into the graphics driver and like the graphics API. Like, I guess you could look for like anomalous draw calls for like highlighting enemies on the screen, or depending on how it's implemented. But that's a really interesting thing to think about. Tyler, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
So one, would you consider Smurfing cheating? And then two, do you guys handle Smurfing?
So thanks for that.
Yeah.
So when I first joined, this is a little funny. When I first joined, so back when I was hacking, Smurfing was a different kind of attack. Okay, so I joined and they're talking about Smurfing, and I'm like, this crap was solved in the 90s. Like, what are you talking about? Like Smurfing, like there used to be like some hacks you could do against a certain popular PC operating system in the 90s. Probably guess which one it is. And you could just send some network packets over it and you could crash the system, and it was called a Smurf attack. So I thought, like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why is the thing? It took me like three meetings, and then I finally like, oh, you're talking about like players that are really good going back and making a new account and then just wasting people. Oh, okay. Well, that's definitely a different problem than like someone sending like Windows 95 a packet or something like that and it crashing or something. So is it cheating? Again, my views are on my own. I don't like it. Based on how my engineering team works, it doesn't qualify as cheating because you're not abusing the engine, you're not abusing any of the general state of the game, right? You're just being a jerk, I guess. And that falls under a different group that will look at, like, if you're a jerk or not, right? That's a different team that handles those kind of things. But normally you get reported for that, right? If you're excessively obvious about it, right? You get reported for that, and then goes through the whole reporting chain for that other group, right? So yeah, I'm neutral but slightly not really in favor of it, but it's not really again, in my opinion, a specific cheat. Basically, it's not something that my team builds solutions for, right?
I actually had a question about engines. You touched on a little bit the engine. Particularly, I've always like admired that Overwatch has been written in a custom engine, and I'm curious like what level of control that gives you when you're working on game security and anti-cheat. And then how does that differ from maybe like your toy project at home? Are you writing that from scratch in your own engine, or are you working in like Unity or in Unreal? And how is the security context different as far as like the level of control?
Sure, I'll answer the last part about my toy project. There's no engine. It is all just straight up C++, very crappily put together C++, but it functions. The intelligence, the AI, if you will, is really just rand int type of thing. Like every once in a while, it'll get lucky and shoot. Every once in a while, it'll run out of the way, stuff like that. It's not really a sophisticated application. But yes, going back to Blizzard titles, we do have, as one of our other legacies, right, is that we have the history and the staffing to put together our own custom solutions for an engine. Not saying that we can't use a Unity or Unreal or something like that out there, right? But you do get, like you're talking to, the power to do essentially whatever you want. And in just get a little bit into the anti-cheat space, because you are that much different, right? You do become a little bit of a harder target, right? You can, if you become like a hacker that's really good at writing cheats for Unreal Engine based games, going from one to the next is like 5% more work or something, right? It's not like, oh man, it's a brand new game, I got to start over from scratch. You kind of build up this knowledge base of how Unreal works, and you know how they program games to draw things or put player state over here or whatever it is that they're doing. And it becomes muscle memory over time, at least if you're a really good one, right? So we do get some benefit for having our own custom sauce where we do it, and it does lead to a little bit easier, if not moderately easier anti-cheat integrations, because we do have that flexibility and such, where we don't have to, like, every time they patch Unreal, we had to go and figure out how to reapply our solutions in the new patch kind of thing. We kind of own our own destiny to a certain extent.
Yeah. It's also interesting. I hadn't originally thought of it, but there is kind of a security moat, as you mentioned, like to having a custom engine versus like there are common loaders for Unity builds where people can say, okay, use a side loader to run custom scripts and like mod games. But when you're working in a custom engine, it's almost like nobody knows how to even approach that. Like they probably have to actually reverse and then get through all of your like reversing obfuscations, and then basically they have no resources.
Well, that's what, if you go back to what I said earlier, 20 years ago, they had very few resources. Now there's like, forums and stuff like that, places dedicated to tracking, cheat and anti-cheat activities, like kind of across the major titles that are out there, right? But yes, it shouldn't be relied upon as a security feature. It's almost like security through obscurity because of that obscurity, but there is nonetheless an advantage to that, right? Now there's less of an advantage if you go from a version 1 of a game to a version 2 of the game that's the same engine, right? Even if it's a custom engine, because the cheaters that have something working in version 1 don't have as much of a lift to get it to work in version 2, all things being equal, right? But the ones that cut their teeth and stick with Unreal, and if you don't have Unreal in your game, they're not a threat to you. I mean, they might eventually switch over to you if the money's right for some reason or whatever, but they're probably going to be entering a space that's already saturated. Are they really going to be able to peel out 500 cheaters from other cheats because theirs is that much better? It's going to take them however long to even get a capability going, right? So, some people, I think, and maybe even the majority, when they kind of get their groove, they kind of stick with their groove, and such, because that's where it makes the most sense, right? Or the most dollars if they're selling. So
Yeah. Do you recommend like I guess anyone who's an aspiring game developer to be more security conscious and learn about like systems and low level programming?
yes, in general, but here's the nuance with that, right? you can be like, completely security conscious. You get a gig, some game studio, and you're an associate developer at kind of at the bottom of the rung, right? And you're assigned with, I don't know, making up something, work on rendering the effects of some explosion or something like that, whatever it is you're doing. Is that particular area going to need security, right? Is someone going to hack? Are they make the explosion look like 10 times bigger, last 10 times longer? I guess there's some things you could do that kind of would be, maybe security matters, right? But unless you're on like, player health rejuvenation code or something like that, right? And you're like, oh, well, this is definitely going to be of interest to like, to some set of cheaters out there, right? They're going to care how fast this player can rejuvenate or whatever, and therefore they're going to look for that like that function and call it 1,000 times a second or whatever it is they're going to do, right? Or they're going to try to change it if they can actually get away with changing it, right? Full life every quarter second, full life. Right? If you get away with doing that, you're going to take that path. So you're going to have a little bit of I'd say challenge towards the beginning of a career if you're starting it off at the as an early developer. But I would say that if you did go that path, you would just say like, look, I'm aware of the security issues. I want to be the security champion for this game. And that's where you can actually probably make an interesting calling for yourself. Because like in our setup, there's some studios where the game security team is embedded with the game. Like they write it for that game. Like I said, they're not putting anyone down, one trick pony. They got like their main game and the anti-cheat's built for that game, and that's how it works. And the game and the anti-cheat team is with the game. With ours, we have so many games, you can't duplicate that many people across that many games. It's not cost efficient, right? And you would also end up with differing qualities across those, right? Because some teams are going to have different skills and they're going to different expertise and so on. So we have like a centralized team responsible for all the games, and that's and I like that. It definitely makes it, like I said, a lot more interesting, a challenge. Me, you have to think of all the different kinds of cheats that can happen across all the different genres that you're supporting. And then come up with like the common building blocks to defend that as best as you can. So it's like I said, it's fun. So but going back to where I was going with that is, if you go in saying like, hey, I know I'm working on this bomb splash effects code, but do you already have a security champion that works with security integrations? No. Hey, I want to do that stuff. How about I go talk to the game security folks and figure out a way to integrate that better, right? Because I will say that that's one of the things that can give you a bit of differentiation, and would also give you the ability to sort of fast track to a certain extent your diversification of your experience. Because if you're like a core game logic developer, something like that, and now you're also doing the security protections of the game code, now you've already doubled your main focus, right? And it's like, as we all know, security is more of a niche field than like the overall developer realm, right? So you sort of also start gaining some knowledge and experience working with the security team that further extends your uniqueness, right? And your own unique perspective of how to protect things going into the future. And that just makes you more valuable longer term.
Yeah, thank you. To kind of move us in the direction of wrapping up a little bit, do you have any advice for us? Obviously, we're kind of approaching the end of our undergraduate studies. Do you have any advice for us as computer scientists or potentially future game developers or game security engineers?
Yeah, so keeping in mind that you're not necessarily security oriented, I'll tackle it from getting into gaming first. I would say perseverance is key. I feel very lucky to have made it into Blizzard. But at the same time, I know I've done a whole bunch of stuff to kind of justify it. And I've heard like, oh, you won't even get an email back if you don't have AAA gaming experience from like, some of the studios. That's not true. It's I mean, yes, you get hundreds or sometimes thousands of applicants for a job, and then you can't, one recruiter can't personalize every response you get back. The perseverance is really key in this domain, especially if you're trying to go to a place, it's some of the bigger studios. And that might mean applying to 30 different jobs before you finally get in, right? It might be 5, it might be 1, right? But don't be, I would say as much as you can, don't be disenchanted by the process, right? It's, gaming is really fun. It's fun to work on games. I'm so excited to be able to see all the stuff I get to see and know all the things I get to know before all you guys get to know them and stuff like that. And then having to like not say anything because it hasn't been announced yet and stuff like that. And then, the whole Microsoft acquisition brings a whole other angle to things, right? But fortunately, like they're we're fairly intact, and they like what we do. So there's not like everything has to be Windows, no more Linux in the future, like kind of stuff, right? There's none of that kind of going on. So yeah, I'd say just stick with it. Be confident in yourself. You've all learned unique things. You all have unique perspective, and use that to your advantage in your interviews and in your careers. And then for those of you that are interested in security, like I said in the last little spiel, right, that wherever you go, they may have a strong security posture. They may have a strong security team, but it doesn't mean the team that you're on has that awareness. It does not mean that team that you're on is applying things properly, right? They may have like people like, oh yeah, we know about the security. We use the SN printfs. Yeah, it's good stuff. You, especially being like younger, have like a bright futures, and AI I know is a bit scary in some regards, like, oh, it's gonna eliminate the jobs, but like I said, it gets things wrong all the time. People need to be able to observe and tune those, and they're going to need to keep doing that for the foreseeable future, right? And security is one of those weird things that is getting kind of pounded by the AI bug, right? Because if you just copy the coded, you don't know someone put a backdoor on it, right? Like or like you said, Ryan, towards the beginning of the call, right? That they just look for the hallucinations and go put a thing there. Really, hacking is literally as easy as cause hallucination, put a thing there that does the stuff. Like you don't have to. I almost don't even want to call it hacking because of how grossly removed from the process of having to do like the challenging work it takes to get to it, right? But yeah, to bring it back, like gaming is fun, is exciting. It's depending where you go, they're gonna have a certain passion, obviously, for what they're working on, and I've heard people that have taken like years to get in to Blizzard, and they stuck with it, and they got in, right? And then like for me, I think I just got a lucky timing. I was like automotive. It's literally because, like I said, LinkedIn just had a thing go by remote. Like can't be true. If I hadn't been like a little bit, and like I don't want to wait another 3 years to see this automotive stuff going on, and it had Blizzard in it. It was like that's what really pulled me to it. It could have been Microsoft Gaming. I would have passed it over. It could have been pick another studio. I'd have passed it over, right? It had to be just Blizzard. The timing has happened to be right, and for you, you'll all get something like that, right? You'll find the timing that's just right to give you that special opportunity. And I just say, like, go out there and grab it. And if you don't get it the first 3 times, those weren't the right opportunities. The 4th time will be the opportunity. The 8th time will be the opportunity. One of them is going to click, and it's going to be your way in, and you're going to love it. And if you do security, all the more to you. I'm excited. Feel free to like hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll add whoever wants to talk to me on LinkedIn. I'll add you up. Yeah, so it's bonus points for security, but no obligation for security, other than being like just generally aware, right? You don't have to go into game security engineering, for instance. So that's what I'm trying to get at. Don't just program poor code, not that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much. I'm just gonna open it back up one more time if anybody has any last questions. Nothing? All right. Well, Nick, it has been awesome having you, seriously. I think a lot of us were super excited for this, and I think it turned out really great. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all. This is a blast. It's my first time doing it at Blizzard, so it's also kind of fun to get out and meet you all. And having that UD tie-in as well has also been great. So I really appreciate all your time. Like I said, if you want to hit me up with questions or anything like that after the fact, feel free to do so. Look forward to all you all successful futures, and take care.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Thanks.